The silence in the dining room was heavier than the crystal chandelier hanging above the long mahogany table. Evelina sat at the far end, her spine pressed against the carved chair as though the wood itself might offer some comfort. She had dressed carefully for this dinner, choosing the pale lavender silk that brought out the quiet gray of her eyes. She had pinned her dark hair with the pearl combs that had belonged to her late mother, hoping they might make her feel braver. They didn't. Her husband, Lucian Blackwood, the Duke of Thornwood, sat at the opposite end of the table, a newspaper folded beside his untouched soup. His attention was fixed on the window, where the last light of a February afternoon was dying over the frosted parkland. He had not spoken a single word to her since entering the room. He had nodded once, a curt acknowledgment of her presence, and then he had become a statue in evening clothes. The servants moved like ghosts around them, clearing plates that had barely been touched. Evelina's own appetite had vanished the moment she heard the door to his study open. She had spent the afternoon practicing conversation starters, little anecdotes about the greenhouse restoration she had begun, a question about his opinion on the new tenant farming methods. She had tried so hard, but the distance between them, those 20 feet of polished floor, felt like a frozen sea she was forbidden to cross. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending a shower of sparks against the iron grate. The sound made her flinch. Lucian did not even glance her way. Evelina looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, and realized she had been holding her breath. She released it slowly, carefully, so that no sigh would betray her. This was her life now. 5 months of marriage, and she had already learned that hopping for warmth from the Duke of Thornwood was like hopping for roses in a blizzard. It only left you colder in the end. She had met him a year ago, at a country assembly she had attended with her father, a baronet whose fortunes had dwindled to little more than a crumbling manor and a proud name. Evelina had known she was not the belle of the season. Her beauty was too quiet, her manner too bookish for the boisterous young gentleman who sought sparkling laughter and flattery. But Lucian Blackwood had stood apart from the crowd, tall and dark, his face carved with an austerity that fascinated rather than frightened her. When he had asked her to dance, his hand barely touching hers, she had felt the world tilt. When he had called upon her father the next week to arrange a marriage of convenience, she had told herself it was still a kind of miracle. He needed an heir, a duchess to manage his estates. She needed security for her family. She had thought foolishly that duty might slowly bloom into something more. But duty was a cold bedfellow. Lucian performed his obligations with impeccable politeness. He escorted her to the few social events he could not avoid. He inquired after her health with the same distant formality he might use with a visiting diplomat. He never raised his voice, never showed cruelty, never gave her any reason to complain. And that somehow was the cruelest part of all. He gave her nothing real to hold on to, nothing to forgive, only an endless, echoing absence. Tonight, as the second course was laid before them, Evelina gathered the frayed edges of her courage. She had received a letter from the village vicar that morning, praising her idea to restore the old parish library. It was a small victory, but it was hers. Perhaps, just perhaps, Lucian might see a flicker of her worth in it. "The vicar sends his thanks," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. "He believes the library will be ready for use by Easter." Lucian's eyes, the color of winter slate, shifted from the window and settled on her for a brief, uncomfortable moment. She felt the weight of his gaze like a physical thing, sharp and assessing. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "That is satisfactory," he said. His voice was low and smooth, utterly devoid of emotion. He returned his gaze to the window. Satisfactory. The word landed in her chest like a stone dropped into a well, sinking without a splash. She had spent weeks planning, organizing, persuading the village elders. She had walked muddy lanes to gather donated books, had charmed the reclusive old scholar in the next county into parting with a collection of histories. And all she received was satisfactory. Not even a well done, Evelina. Not even a flicker of pride. Something inside her, a tiny flame she had carefully guarded through the long, lonely months, guttered, and went out. She felt the change physically, a hollowing sensation behind her ribs. She picked up her spoon and forced herself to taste the soup. It was thick with cream and herbs, a dish the cook had prepared specially because she knew the young Duchess favored it. The warmth on her tongue brought a sting of tears to her eyes, not from gratitude, but from the aching contrast between the kitchen's unseen kindness and her husband's empty seat. She finished her meal in silence. When Lucien rose abruptly, excusing himself with a murmured word about estate papers, she did not look up. She listened to his footsteps retreat down the marble corridor, each step a small, precise note of rejection. The moment he was gone, the tightness in her throat eased slightly, and she hated herself for feeling relief. That night, lying in her vast, lonely bed, staring at the canopy embroidered with the Blackwood crest, Evelina made a quiet decision. She would no longer wait for a love that showed no sign of arriving. She would stop offering her heart like an unwanted gift. She would fill her days with purpose, not pinning. She would become the Duchess Thornwood needed, but she would do it for herself, for the tenants, for the quiet pride of knowing she had not let a cold man turn her into a ghost. The change did not happen overnight. The first weeks of her new resolve were the hardest. Every morning she woke with the habit of listening for his step outside her door, a sound that never came. Every evening she dressed for dinner with a small, traitorous hope that tonight he might really see her, and every night she went to bed with that hope crushed. But slowly, deliberately, she began to fill the hollow spaces. She threw herself into the estate with an energy that surprised everyone, including herself. She visited every tenant cottage on the vast Thornwood lands, sitting in smoky kitchens, listening to worries about crop rot and sick children. She learned their names, their histories, their small joys. She organized a winter clothing drive for the neediest families and wrote letters to charitable societies in London, securing funds for a new village well. The steward, a gruff man named Mr. Carlyle, was skeptical at first, but within a month he was deferring to her judgment on matters of home farms and dairy yields. The servants began to look at her differently. Mrs. Hatch, the housekeeper, who had served the Blackwood family for 30 years, started leaving small bouquets of dried lavender on Evelina's writing desk. The young scullery maid stopped trembling when the Duchess entered the kitchen and instead offered shy smiles. Evelina discovered that being useful was its own kind of medicine. It did not heal the wound Lucien had left, but it bandaged it well enough that she could function without constant pain. Lucien noticed nothing. He was often absent, traveling to London for parliamentary business or secluded in his study behind doors that were never open to her. When they dined together, which happened perhaps twice a week now, the silence was no longer a battle Evelina fought to break. She let it sit between them, a quiet companion she had learned to accept. She no longer offered anecdotes about her day or asked for his opinions. She answered his few polite questions with brief, courteous replies, and then returned her attention to her own thoughts. The change was so gradual that even she did not fully grasp it until a late spring evening, when she realized she had gone an entire day without thinking of him at all. The day had been full and satisfying. She had spent the morning in the still-room with Mrs. Hatch, brewing tonics for the ague that had spread through the lower village. In the afternoon, she had ridden out to the far pastures to inspect a new flock of sheep, her mare's hooves kicking up the scent of crushed grass. The sun had been warm on her face, the wind clean and sharp. Returning to the hall, dusty and pleasantly tired, she had hummed a folk tune under her breath. She had not once wondered where Lucien was or whether he might finally smile at her across the dinner table. She had simply lived her day. The realization was startling and strangely freeing. She stood in her bedchamber, brushing out her tangled hair, and met her own eyes in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was thinner, perhaps, with new lines of determination around her mouth, but her eyes were brighter. She was surviving. More than that, she was beginning to thrive in the soil of his neglect. That was the moment the hope truly died, and in its place grew something tougher, something that belonged solely to her. The arrival of Lord Nathaniel Sterling was the first pebble that disturbed the still surface of her new existence. He came to the neighborhood in early June, taking up residence at Ashwood Grange, a pretty manor 3 miles distant that had stood empty for years. He was a second son, she learned, a man with no title to inherit but a comfortable independence and a reputation as an accomplished watercolorist. He brought letters of introduction to the Duke, and Lucien, with the automatic hospitality of his station, invited him to dine. Evelina had not expected much of the evening. She had dressed in a gown of soft moss green, pinned her hair simply, and descended to the drawing-room with her usual quiet composure. But the moment Nathaniel Sterling bowed over her hand, his hazel eyes warm with genuine interest, she felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten. "Your Grace," he said, and his smile was easy, unguarded, "I have heard nothing but praise for your work in the village. The new well, the library, the school plans. You have quite transformed the place, they say." His words were not empty flattery. He spoke with a painter's appreciation for detail, asking thoughtful questions about the difficulties of managing a large estate's charitable works. He listened to her answers with an attention that felt almost startling after months of being ignored. He told her about his own travels through the Lake District, sketching the fells, and his descriptions were so vivid she could almost see the mist rising from the water. Lucien sat by the fireplace, a glass of port untouched at his elbow. He watched them. Evelina, conscious of his gaze for the first time in weeks, felt a strange mixture of defiance and unease. She did not seek his approval anymore, but his silent observation was a new kind of pressure. She kept her conversation with Nathaniel bright and impersonal, yet when he made her laugh, a soft, surprised sound, she saw Lucien's fingers tighten on the arm of his chair. The dinner that followed was unlike any they had shared since the first weeks of marriage. Nathaniel's presence filled the room with an ease that made the vast table feel almost intimate. He included Lucien in the conversation with skillful courtesy, drawing him out on matters of agricultural reform, until the Duke was actually speaking in full sentences. But his attention always circled back to Evelina, his eyes finding her with a warmth that made her cheeks flush faintly. "You must let me sketch the West Gardens," Nathaniel said as the dessert course was cleared. "The light there in the late afternoon is extraordinary, all gold and lavender, and I should like to capture the Duchess among the roses, if she would be so kind." Evelina opened her mouth to politely demur, but Lucien spoke first. His voice was perfectly level, yet it cut across the table with an edge she had never heard before. "The Duchess has many responsibilities, Sterling. I doubt she has hours to waste sitting for portraits." The words were icy, dismissive. Evelina felt heat rush to her face, not from embarrassment but from a slow, simmering anger. How dare he speak of wasting her time when he had squandered months of her life in silence? She lifted her chin and met Nathaniel's startled gaze with a calm smile. "On the contrary," she said, her voice smooth as river stone, "I find the idea delightful. I have been working very hard lately, and an afternoon in the garden sounds like a lovely respite. Lord Sterling, I would be honored." She did not look at Lucien. She did not need to. She could feel the chill radiating from his end of the table like frost spreading across glass. Nathaniel came to Thornwood twice the following week. Each time he and Evelina walked the gardens, he with his sketchbook, she with a parasol against the summer sun. He drew her seated on a stone bench surrounded by old damask roses, her profile outlined against the weathered garden wall. He drew her standing by the ornamental pond, her reflection rippling beside the lily pads. He talked as he worked, his conversation a gentle, undemanding stream of stories and observations. He never said anything improper, never touched her beyond the briefest contact of a pencil adjusting the angle of her chin. But his admiration was clear, a quiet, steady glow that Evelina found herself leaning toward like a plant starved of light. The household noticed. Evelina caught the maids whispering, saw Mrs. Hatch's thoughtful glances. Mr. Carlyle, meeting her in the estate office, cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "It is good to see you enjoying company, Your Grace. You have seemed more at ease lately." The unspoken words hung in the air, more at ease than when the Duke is here. Lucien noticed too. She knew it by the way he began appearing in places she did not expect. She would be walking back from the village and find him on the gravel drive, ostensibly examining a drainage ditch. She would be in the library, reading to a group of tenant children, and glance up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He never stayed long, never offered explanation. He simply watched her, a dark, still figure at the edge of her newly busy life. One evening, a fortnight after Nathaniel's first visit, Evelina returned to the hall just as twilight was deepening into dusk. She had spent the afternoon at the Grange, viewing Nathaniel's collection of Italian landscapes. It had been a pleasant, undemanding afternoon, and she felt a quiet contentment as she handed her gloves to the butler. "Her Grace is in the library," the butler murmured, and for a moment Evelina was confused. Then she understood. Lucien was waiting for her. She found him standing before the cold fireplace, his back to the door. He turned when she entered, and the look on his face was one she had never seen before. It was not anger exactly, nor coldness. It was something rawer, something that flickered like a candle flame in a draught. "You were at Sterling's house," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," she replied evenly. "He invited me to see his latest work. It was quite remarkable." "You have been spending a great deal of time with him." Evelina met his eyes without flinching. The old Evelina, the one who had waited trembling for any crumb of his regard, would have apologized, explained, reassured him that nothing was improper. This Evelina felt only a weary sort of curiosity. "I have," she said. "He is excellent company. He listens when I speak. He finds my thoughts worth hearing. It is refreshing." The words hung between them like a thrown gauntlet. Lucien's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You are my wife," he said, his voice low and rough. "I am your Duchess," she corrected softly. "I manage your household. I oversee your tenants. I attend your dinner parties. I have been your wife in title for over half a year, but you have never once treated me as anything more than a fixture in your house. Do not now pretend to a jealousy you have no right to feel." The color drained from his face, leaving it stark and pale. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and she saw something break in the depths of his gray eyes, something she could not name. Then he turned sharply and walked out of the library, his footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. Evelina stood alone in the darkening room, her heart pounding. She had spoken a truth she had not even fully admitted to herself until the words left her lips, and it had not felt like victory. It had felt like grief, an old grief she had long suppressed, finally allowed to breathe. After that night, something shifted in the air of Thornwood Hall. Lucien no longer hovered at the edges of her days. He withdrew completely, but it was not the same cold withdrawal of before. There was a heaviness to his absence now, a brooding quality that seeped through the walls. The servants reported that he was spending long hours in his study, but no paperwork was being done. He merely sat, staring at the portrait of his father that hung above the mantel. He canceled his trip to London. He ate his meals alone. Evelina, for her part, found herself caught between two emotions. Part of her relished the sting of his evident pain. He deserved to feel a fraction of the loneliness he had imposed on her. But another part, the tender, foolish part she had tried so hard to bury, ached at the sight of his drawn face, his untouched plates. She did not love him any more, she told herself. She could not. The well was dry, but she did not wish him to suffer. She simply wanted to be free of the whole tangled mess. Nathaniel, perceptive as always, sensed the changed atmosphere. During one of their garden walks, he paused beside the sundial and fixed her with a searching look. "You seem troubled, Your Grace, more so than before. Is there anything I might do?" Evelina smiled faintly, looking out over the rose beds, their petals beginning to brown at the edges with the approach of autumn. You have been a true friend, Lord Sterling. I am more grateful than I can say. But this is a tangle of my own making, or perhaps of my own marriage. I must find my way through it." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "The Duke is not a cruel man, I think, but he is a haunted one. There are rooms in that house I suspect even he has locked and forgotten." His words lingered with her long after he had gone. Haunted. Yes, that felt true. But what haunted Lucian Blackwood? What ghost had frozen him into this remote, unreachable figure? She realized with a pang of something like shame that she had never truly asked. She had been so consumed with her own hurt that she had never considered what might lie beneath his coldness. The answer came, as such things often do, not through grand revelation but through quiet, unexpected kindness. It was Mrs. Hatch who finally opened the locked door. The elderly housekeeper found Evelina in the still room one rainy October afternoon, sorting dried herbs by the light of a single candle. She was a woman who had always maintained a respectful distance, but today she lingered, her hands clasped over her starched apron. "Your Grace," she said hesitantly, "might I speak freely?" "Of course, Mrs. Hatch." Evelina set down the lavender bundle and turned her full attention to the older woman. "It is about His Grace." Mrs. Hatch's voice was tight with some long-held emotion. "I have served this family since before he was born. I watched him grow from a bright, laughing boy into the man he is today, and I know what broke him." Evelina's heart stilled. "Tell me." The story spilled out in quiet, halting sentences. 10 years ago, when Lucian was only 20, he had fallen deeply in love. The woman was named Celia, the daughter of a neighboring baron. She was beautiful, vivacious, everything that a young man could dream of. Lucian had worshipped her. He had proposed marriage with all the fervent passion of his young heart. The wedding date was set, the banns were read. And then, 2 days before the ceremony, Celia had vanished. She had eloped with a wealthy merchant's son, leaving behind only a brief, careless note, saying she had never loved Lucian, that she had only wanted his title, and that she found the merchant's fortune more agreeable. "He was never the same," Mrs. Hatch whispered. "He closed himself off. He became hard and cold, as if any feeling at all was a weakness he could not afford. He swore he would never love again. When he finally agreed to marry you, I had hope. You were so gentle, so bright. I thought perhaps you could thaw him, but I see now that he was too afraid to even try." Evelina sat motionless, the candle flame blurring before her eyes. Not anger, not grief, but a profound, aching pity flooded her chest. He had been hurt, terribly, savagely hurt, and he had spent 10 years building a fortress of ice to protect himself from ever feeling that pain again. She, in her desperate need to be loved, had been throwing herself against those frozen walls, never realizing they were not built to keep her out, but to keep him safe. She understood now. She understood everything. The polite distance, the careful control, the fear that flickered behind his eyes when Nathaniel had made her laugh. It was not indifference. It was terror, terror of loving and losing again. But understanding did not erase her own wounds. She could forgive him, she could pity him, but could she ever trust her heart to a man so determined to protect his own at her expense? She did not know. That night sleep would not come. She rose and wrapped herself in a shawl, drifting through the silent corridors until she found herself outside the library door. A thin line of light showed beneath it. She pushed it open without knocking. Lucian was there, as she had known he would be. He sat in his great leather chair, no book in his hands, no papers on his desk. He was simply staring into the dying fire, a decanter of brandy untouched beside him. He looked up when she entered, and the raw exhaustion on his face made her breath catch. "Evelina." Her name on his lips was a question, a plea. She crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite him, not too close, not too far. "I spoke with Mrs. Hatch tonight," she said quietly. "She told me about Celia." He flinched as if she had struck him. The firelight carved deep shadows under his cheekbones, in the hollows of his eyes. He looked away, his jaw working silently. "It was a long time ago," he said, his voice barely audible. But it is not over, Evelina replied. It has never been over. You have carried it with you every day of our marriage. You have made me pay for a wound I never inflicted. He closed his eyes. A tremor ran through his shoulders. I know. The words were torn from him, ragged and broken. I know what I have done to you. I know I have been cold, absent, unforgivable. I told myself I was giving you everything you needed. The title, the security, the respect. I told myself that was enough, that I was protecting us both. Protecting us from what? She asked, her voice trembling despite herself. His eyes opened and met hers, and there it was at last, the wall crumbling in real time. His gaze was wet, his composure shattered. From this, he whispered, from caring so much it destroys me. I thought if I kept you at a distance, if I never let myself feel, I would be safe. But I see you, Evelina. I have seen you for months, tending my tenants, winning my servants, walking in your quiet grace while I sat in my cold room pretending I was not watching. And when Sterling came, when he made you laugh, when he looked at you as if you were the sun, something inside me broke. I was so jealous I could not breathe. And I knew I had no right. I had pushed you away. I had made you lonely. I had made you stop loving me. The words tumbled out in a flood, years of suppressed emotion breaking through the dam. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. I loved you too late, he said, and his voice cracked on the word loved. Too late and too poorly. I do not know how to do this. I do not know how to be a husband who deserves you. But I am begging you, Evelina, please, do not leave me. Do not turn to him. Give me a chance to learn. Evelina sat very still, her heart a wild, painful drum in her chest. This was what she had dreamed of once. A declaration, a plea, a crack in the ice. But it was not the victorious moment she had imagined. It was just two wounded people, sitting in the dark, trying to find a way forward. I did love you, she said slowly, each word careful and measured. I loved you with all my young, hopeful heart. I brought you that love every day, and every day you turned away. I have only just stopped bleeding from the rejection. I cannot simply turn my feelings back on like a lamp. I need time. I need to see that this is real, that you are not just frightened of losing something you never valued until someone else did. He nodded, a short, jerky motion. I understand. I will wait. I will prove it if you will let me. I will learn to be what you need, even if it takes the rest of my life. She rose from the chair, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. At the door, she paused and looked back. He was still watching her, his face a map of desperate hope and deep, abiding fear. Start by joining me for breakfast tomorrow, she said. Not because duty demands it, but because you want to hear about my day. That is step one. A ghost of a smile, the first she had ever truly seen on his face, flickered at the corner of his mouth. Step one, he repeated. I will be there. The days that followed were not a fairy tale. Healing did not come in a single, sweeping embrace. It came in small, painstaking gestures. Lucien appeared at the breakfast table the next morning, looking as though he had not slept at all. He asked about her plans, and when she told him about a particularly stubborn drainage problem in the lower fields, he listened and offered to ride out with her to inspect it. They spent the morning together in the mud and the chill October wind, speaking of gravel and culverts, and it was the most intimate conversation they had ever had. He began to join her on her rounds of the tenant cottages. He stood quietly by while she soothed a crying baby and charmed a grumpy old farmer. He watched her with new eyes, seeing not just the graceful duchess but the capable, compassionate woman she was. He stumbled often. There were silences that stretched too long, moments when old habits of retreat surfaced and he had to visibly force himself to stay. But he tried. For the first time, he truly tried. Nathaniel Sterling sensed the shift. He came to take his leave one afternoon in November, finding Evelina in the greenhouse where she was potting winter herbs. He looked at her with his warm, knowing eyes and smiled gently. I believe I am no longer needed here, he said without bitterness. Whatever haunted the Duke is being laid to rest, and you Your grace are glowing in a way I have not seen before." Evelina set down her trowel and took his hands. "You have been a true friend in a dark time. I will never forget it." He bowed over her fingers, a brush of lips that was more friendship than romance. "Write to me if ever you need a reminder of your own strength, but I suspect you will not." And then he was gone, leaving only a small watercolor of the rose garden propped on the potting bench. In it, she was laughing, the sun catching the curve of her cheek. December brought the first snows, blanketing Thornwood in a soft, silencing white. Evelina stood at the library window, watching the flakes drift down when Lucien came to stand beside her. They had spent the afternoon reading together, not speaking much, but comfortable in the shared space. It had become their new ritual, these quiet hours. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Her heart stumbled. "It is not what you think," he said quickly, a flush rising on his cheekbones. "It is not a bribe or a grand gesture. It is only a promise." He opened the box. Inside lay a brooch, delicate silver work shaped like a sprig of rosemary. Rosemary for remembrance, she thought. "I had it made," he said, his voice low and earnest, "to remind myself. Every day I will remember the pain I caused you. Every day I will remember the gift you are giving me now in letting me try again. I will never take you for granted. I will never be that cold, blind fool again." Evelina looked at the little brooch, at the earnest, vulnerable man beside her, and felt the last of the frozen places inside her begin to thaw. She had not known if she could ever love him again. She had been so afraid of being hurt. But standing there, with the snow falling and the fire crackling, she realized that love was not a switch to be turned on and off. It was a seed that could lie dormant through the hardest winter and still, with enough patience and light, find the strength to bloom. She lifted the brooch from the box and pinned it to her collar, her fingers brushing his for just a moment. His breath caught. "Remembrance is good," she said softly, "but do not dwell only on the past. Look forward with me, Lucien. That is all I ask." He took her hand then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She did not. His fingers were warm and slightly unsteady. "I love you," he said. The words were simple, unadorned, and completely true. "I love you, and I will spend every day showing you." She looked up into his gray eyes, no longer winter slate but the soft, hopeful color of a thawing sky, and smiled. "I am learning to love you again," she answered, "but I think I am a very quick study." He laughed, a startled, joyful sound that seemed to surprise even him. It was the first time she had ever heard him truly laugh. The sound filled the library, warmer than any fire. Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping Thornwood Hall in a quiet, healing blanket. Inside, two people who had traveled through pain, distance, jealousy, and regret stood hand in hand, finally on the same side of the frozen sea, ready to walk forward into the spring that would surely come.